How can a country run its affairs as one entity when you are separated by something like 1,000 miles, over 1,000 miles? But they tried to run it. And what was the wisdom of the creators of a nation which was in these two entities? A lot of people spoke about, Indonesia, different islands, if they are running their affairs, then why can't Pakistan run their affairs like this? But this morning we've been hearing perspectives after perspectives of that these two entities, if I choose to call, in the same nation, had very, very different cultural understanding of each other or the misunderstanding of each other. Yet, when it was being created by its creators, if I again choose to refer to the British and to the leaders, Muhammad Ali Jinnah at that time, did they not realize what they're creating? And did they not realize whether these two entities would stick together? But I think at that time, religion was being seen as the only reason why they should separate out. Geography became, I think, a requirement of the British under the Great Game. They wanted Western Pakistan to be where it is. But what was so much in Great Game that they created East Pakistan? And then when it got created, they could not build the constitution where they could hold it together, and then they had constitutional problems and it did not become a republic. But ultimately what happened, I think the political manifestation went through a metamorphosis where they tried to stick it together through compulsion, through coercion, through constitutional, I would say, artificial bringing the constitution to agree, to disagree, ultimately they disagreed. So today in the conversation, I have Ambassador Pinak Chakravarty, who was there in the morning. He's been a High Commissioner in Dhaka from 2007 to 2009, and before that he was also Deputy High Commissioner 99 to 2002. And of course, he spoke about his earlier career in West Pakistan, in Karachi. We are talking about perspective which is not his or mine perspective. We are actually going to talk about a perspective which is of Pakistan. Only Pakistan would be able to talk for what they did, why they choose to do the way they did in East Pakistan. But I think this is a conversation which is interesting for the simple reason that let us assume that we are thinking from the minds of West Pakistan, that what was the strategy, what were they trying to achieve in East Pakistan. We might have Christine Fair join. She's actually on the other side of the globe. She's not at the moment at home. If she comes, well, she will join us. If she doesn't come, we will still do something to make her join. But before she comes in, I will request Ambassador Chakravarty to talk about what do you think Western Pakistan or Pakistan was doing in East Pakistan after they became an entity by itself. Then over a period of time, ultimately they landed up running a scorched earth policy. Why did it happen? And what were they up to? And what were the outcomes that they expected?
Well, let me begin by stating something that some of you may have read about. It was a noting in the British archives during when partition was already decided that and that there would be two wings of Pakistan. Some very prescient British bureaucrat or diplomat, I don't know, forget his name now, wrote that East Pakistan is very likely to secede. Now this is 1947, 48. Very likely to secede or seek merger with India. This is what he wrote. Now the merger point is very interesting because at the fag end, when Pakistan was about to be created, I don't know how many of you know this, but some of the leading Bengali leaders of that time, including the Muslim leaders, Surawarti, Fazlul Haq, Subhash Bose's elder brother, Sarad Bose, etc., they wrote a letter to Jawaharlal Nehru saying that please do not divide Bengal. We would like to remain together. Now, what happened at that time was they finally realized that Pakistan is going to happen, although Fazlul Haq was the mover of the Lahore resolution. Right, Sajad bhai? Now these people suddenly turned around and asked Pandit Nehru in that letter, it's there in the archives, that, please keep Bengal united. They didn't say, Panditji wrote back in a very interesting way, saying that, I don't mind if Bengal remains united, provided it is within the Union of India. That was his reply. That, of course, killed the whole proposal naturally, because Radcliffe was already carving it up on the border, etc. So this factor has to be remembered, that Jinnah himself came out after the partition, that what have I received? It's a moth-eaten Pakistan. See, they never expected. They thought they will get much more than what they actually got, including Calcutta. They said Calcutta should be with Pakistan. But then, of course, there was the pushback from the leaders, mainly the Hindu leaders of Bengal. And in fact, later the Bengali Hindu leaders demanded partition, saying that it's good, let's happen. Enough is enough. It's better. It's very interesting history. In 1871, when the first census was created, the British discovered in 1872, when the results started coming in, that Bengal had become majority Muslim. They didn't know that before. And this happened mainly in the eastern part of Bengal. Anyway, those are all historical anecdotes. I don't want to. But your question about what the Pakistanis or the West Pakistanis were planning, I think we'll have to look at it in some context. What was happening at that time in Pakistan? Ayub had been removed sometime during 68 or 9 or something like that, or maybe before that. And this guy, what's his name? Yahya Khan became the CMLA and then president and all that. 59, no? 69. And 65, we had a war. 62. The 60s were very, very interesting for that matter, these events that were taking place. When he came, and 1970, because of pressure, we must have elections and all that, the usual thing that happens when you are a putative democracy or a quasi-democracy. So you had the 1970 elections. I think that was the beginning of more or less the downhill sort of slide into the liberation war. Because Yahya Khan, in his last visit to Dhaka, where he met Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in fact, left Sheikh Mujibur Rahman with a very positive kind of a thing, that you will be the next Prime Minister of India. He fed him this line. And then there was another character we all know called Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was determined that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman would not become the Prime Minister. That led to a very serious problem. So the political problem then morphed into various other issues.
Ambassador, to start flying in your army, in the aircrafts, and then, of course, India banned and did not give the Indian airspace to Pakistan, because the way things were brewing up, Kashmir, Foco Friendship is burnt here in Pakistan after hijack. And then, of course, the entire lift had to be a sea lift. They had to go down into Arabian Sea over Sri Lanka and then go up into the Bay of Bengal and start supplying arms and ammunition. But the build-up happened. The military build-up was happening. The Air Force, the tanks were being moved in there. Was it the intent, as we can assume, of West Pakistan Army that they will have to fight a war? Or all these tanks and planes were basically moved to have the resistance movement which was brewing up, to give a very military high hand, or even a signaling that, look, the military is there and we are strong, to quell through this kind of iron hand, military iron hand, or a military show in hand. So was the military move there to fight the insurgency or the freedom movement, or they had larger design? Is there any understanding of that?
No, I don't buy the argument of a larger design. I think they moved in because they wanted to crush the Bengalis. It was as simple as that. And they realized that these Bengalis, they're non-martial race, chote hain, naate hain, although I am 6'1", but that doesn't matter. This was the attitude. This was the arrogance and the whoopery of these guys from West Pakistan. And we are bigger, we are stronger, we will deal with these fellows and we'll make them see reason. इनको मार के हम ठीक कर देंगे. That was the attitude. And that is why they decided to crush. And it happened after this guy, what's his name? Yahya Khan went back after that meeting, and that's when they launched the Searchlight and various other atrocities that they...
So what was this American support all about? The Western world threatening India, you will go to war, we will, make sure that, we will snub you and we will take military action. Why was this warning coming to India when they did not expect India to do anything?
Look, the US was acting in its own interest. And that was the opening to China. Look, I have mentioned this before, it was the height of the Cold War. The US policy during Cold War was containment of communism. You all know all this history. And they were trying to open up to China because China by then had fallen out with Russia. So they were trying to build up China to counter Russia. And that became such a, Kissinger went quietly from Islamabad to Beijing and all that stories are very much there. I would recommend that if you are interested, you should read The Blood Telegram by Professor Gary Bass. Very, very interesting. Archer Blood was the Consul General in Dhaka, and he was one of the dissenters. And a lot of American diplomats, by the way, dissented officially as to US action, Kissinger's actions. And of course, Kissinger made sure that Archer Blood couldn't survive in the diplomatic service. So what Kissinger was trying to do was to pursue his interest of opening up to China. And Pakistan was proving to be a springboard for that. But I think if you read his memoirs, you will know that Kissinger had reached the conclusion that East Pakistan will secede and will become Bangladesh. He knew that. So in other words, he was using this whole game to pursue his Chinese interest. Pakistanis, of course, were helping him, thinking that America will go to back them. America made that gesture of 7th Fleet, etc. But it was, I don't think they were serious about coming in there and trying to say, no, you cannot secede, etc. I doubt it very much.
So I believe the Pakistanis also got assurance from the Gulf. Many countries sent them planes, of course, without pilots and some with pilots. And of course, during the war, they all took their planes away and landed up here and there. But the fact is that I understand that Americans' noise was more of a hot balloon, hot air, rather than actual intent that they would support Pakistan. But was Pakistan emboldened by these statements of America, and then they felt that the Indians won't come, and therefore they let the whole, Indian Pakistan army, not expecting Indian army to attack? Was that assurance to them, or they were just simply fools?
I think they were lulled into some kind of, the Americans must have lulled them into some kind of a belief that we are there, we are going to help you, etc. And we'll tell China also to help open another front, so India will not be able to do anything. You are probably right. I mean, none of us know for sure. But from what I have read in the memoirs and various things, that seems very likely. And Pakistanis were confident that the US will bail them out, and they could get away with what they were doing. But then, interestingly, the China point you can come later. Shall I talk about that?
Actually, I was looking at the Western perspective. In fact, I was talking to Christine Fair if she's showed up. Otherwise, we will just ask her to, play a clip, and let's see the Western perspective on it, and then we will come back to how we think Pakistan was to do the business and win a war, or maybe not allow Bangladesh to be created and alter the whole demography to make Bangladesh, not Bangladesh, but West Pakistan and Punjabi Pakistan. I mean, I think that was too much imagination.
No, there was ethnic cleansing. I mean, after all, the 10 million odd or more people who came into India as refugees, 90% were Hindus. There was no doubt about it. And they were trying to do some ethnic cleansing also during this process.
So let's hear what Christine Fair has to say. I have a record of it. If she joins, it's fine. Otherwise, she's already spoken to me. And let's see what the Western world has been thinking and what is their mindset on South Asia. And of course, she speaks a lot about 1971, unfinished agenda. She's also written very recently an article I was referring to.
She has a view about whether India's actions in 1971 fulfilled India's objectives entirely. Obviously not. That's her argument. That was India left with a bigger problem because West Pakistan became more integrated, then it went in a different direction, became a nuclear weapon power, etc.
So you've been watching Christine Fair, talk on the subject often.
Many years.
For many years. She has also given a perspective here. Do you think she's actually deeply into Pakistan affair, or she understands India equally well?
Well, essentially South Asia, but yes, she's written books on Pakistan. And one of her famous books is that, the Pakistan Army. It's on the Pakistan Army, their way of war or something like that. Very interesting.
Okay, so let's hear.
Because she makes a very useful comment there, saying when Pakistan loses a battle or a war, it actually translates it into victory.
Yeah, she's written in Garhwal Post also recently. So let's hear Christine Fair. Please play Christine. Christine, good to see you. In fact, these years are not easy years when you talk about geostrategic discussions on any issue. But what is significant is that you and me are talking about at a time when India and Pakistan both became independent countries 75 years back. And also, we became independent, but we were also partitioned. But don't you think so? This partition was ill-founded and built on fault lines. And do you think that the creation of Pakistan was done in the manner of location? Was it a Western design as part of the great game? Or was it something which was naturally to be what it became? Christine, your views.
So first, thanks for having me. So on the question of partition, I can say definitively the British did not want to partition India and Pakistan. This was not anything that the British had desired. And the reason for that was that they built a fairly complicated security architecture to manage threat frontiers coming from Russia via Afghanistan, as well as the Chinese, right? That they didn't want partition to happen doesn't mean that they were not culpable for the way in which partition did happen. But I think that blame can really be apportioned across multiple parties. So I think the first thing that people might forget is that the Indian National Congress withdrew from government when the United Kingdom declared war against Germany on behalf of India. And immediately the Britons put into jail those Congress leaders. And during this period, the Muslim leaders really had the sole ear of the British. So this, I think, withdrawing from the government and then being put into jail really removed a lot of opportunity for the Congress leaders to press their position on what a post-independence India should look like. But I think the other issue really came down to Jinnah's intransigence and ultimately the Congress's decision how to handle his intransigence. So Jinnah it wasn't easy for him to sell the people that would eventually be Pakistanis on the idea of Pakistan. People might forget that in the 1936-37 elections, the Muslim League was routed. And in those portions that would become Pakistan, there was very little support for it, except perhaps in East Pakistan. So he took the next decade before the 46-47 elections to basically do a lot of wheeling and dealing. He told different people different things what this Pakistan would be. And of course, in the 1946-47 elections, the Muslim League swept those areas that would become Pakistan, with the exception of the Northwest Frontier Province, which voted for the Indian National Congress, and they actually wanted to remain with India. So Jinnah really went into the dispensation or the negotiations with a really hard position, that the two nation theory said that India's Muslims and Hindus were equal civilizations, even though they were disparate in numbers. And he was arguing for equal representation in a united federal parliament. And of course, everyone knows that the Britons had decided that they were going to expedite independence by 1 year. It was supposed to happen in 1948, not 1947. And the Indian National Congress was fearful that if there couldn't be an agreement on how the country would be governed independently, that maybe the Britons would reverse course. So the Indians basically, the Indian National Congress basically said to Jinnah, well, you know what, have your Pakistan, go at it. So I think there was a lot of blame to go around for the decision to partition. But the way in which India was partitioned, the blame for that solely defaults to the British, right? We know all of the horror stories. Radcliffe knew nothing about India. He was there only briefly before partition. The award of partition was only announced after independence and after he had been put on a boat to escape. And a lot of people believe that much of the communal bloodshed could have been spared had the award been announced well in advance of partition.
Well, there were fault lines, but largely there were selfish reasons, political parties and the leaders had to get the partition be done the way it got done. But having gone through the partition, in your recent article, you have spoken about unfinished agenda. Whose unfinished agenda is it? Has that unfinished agenda seen through fall through of East Pakistan and becoming Bangladesh, or there is some other unfinished agenda that you're talking about?
Well,
unfinished agenda and how it would be completed?
Well, I was really talking about the 1971 war, right? And I mean, in some sense, so there's a debate about some Bangladeshi nationalists would say that the reason why Bengalis in what became East Pakistan supported partition, some will say that they saw this as a stepping stone to having an independent Bangladesh, Bengali Desh. It had various different potential monikers. So my article focused on the 1971 war, in particular, thinking about this is the 50th anniversary of that war. It's coming up very soon. And so when I think back about that war, for me, it raises a lot of questions. As is well known, India vivisected Pakistan. It was the undisputed victor, but it ceded those gains at Shimla. It's astonishing that pretty much every single Pakistani demand India acquiesced to. And I think there's a really strong argument that can be made that Pakistan may have lost that particular battle, but I think it may have won the war over time. The Pakistan that emerged is ironically stronger. It is more secure. It doesn't have to bother about this indefensible East. It doesn't have to deal with the very significant cultural differences that existed between the East and the West. And the Pakistan that emerged was a much more successful rent seeker from the international community, being able to sell its strategic utility to the highest bidder, which in many cases over time at different periods was the United States. The goals of the Bangladeshis, the Bengalis who then became Bangladeshis, their goals of setting up a secular democracy faltered within years. Bangladesh is not a secular democracy today. Bangladesh's Sheikh Hasina rules that country like an autocrat. Corruption is rife. She maintains power very much like her father did, which was similarly, I might add, to how Zulfikar Ali Bhutto retained power by manipulating the instruments of coercion to eliminate, in many cases through death, and in other cases, silence any of her political rivals as well as her critics at home. And then, given these two realities, is India safer as a result of vivisecting Pakistan? India did not want there to be a miniature Pakistan to establish itself in the East. But if you take a more patient examination of Bangladesh's trajectory, this isn't the Bangladesh that India had imagined. And in fact, had India not vivisected the country, Pakistan would have been far more indefensible than it is. So for me, I thought that the 50-year anniversary of the 1971 war was an occasion to really reconsider, did the Pakistanis lose after all?
I think Pakistan army has been ruling the roost nationally, internationally.
Yeah.
They've had the best of the time. How is it that Pakistan having a nuclear bomb on one side, the terrorist, on the other side? Do you think with this great combination, they have been running this enterprise of nearly failing state and not failing yet? But at the end of it today, if you look at the entire globe where people should focus on, it should literally be Pakistan.
So logically speaking, right, Pakistan, which has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world, and this flotilla of terrorist organizations, it should be a pariah, right? It should be treated like a North Korea or Iran. So I don't disagree with you. But I also understand how others have a different opinion about how best to handle it. It's a view that I reject, but it's a view I also understand. They believe, so this is just good old-fashioned nuclear coercion, right? So what Pakistan says, and it's interesting, this doesn't work when Iran or North Korea does it, right? So which tells you that there's something else going on, that this isn't strictly speaking logic. But what Pakistan essentially does is that it holds a gun to its head and it says, pay me or I'm going to shoot myself. Pakistan continues to coerce the world to keep writing checks. Now, I've long argued that this is completely backwards, because as long as we keep writing the checks, Pakistan can continue to grow the two things that we apparently fear the most, right? That we need to be treating Pakistan like Iran. Pakistan has bought a lot of lobbyists, right? Lobbying is a large budget for it. And then it also uses
when you say lobbyists from where?
Well, lobbying is legal in the United States. So there are firms that Pakistan has hired over time, many firms, in fact.
So are we saying that actually Pakistan Army, Al-Qaeda, Taliban are all going to be security guards for the Chinese to extract minerals from there? And
Yes.
and that is how the stability would come, only for the sake of Chinese. Don't disturb Chinese. They are at work and we will guard you.
That's right. Exactly.
So do you think this calculation that I'm talking about, or this formula that I'm talking about, for the sake of Chinese, will see some amount of stability? Otherwise, I do not know. I would like to ask you in Punjabi, Pakistan da ki hoega?
Wo hi hovega. This is the other thing about Pakistan that people don't get, right? Kuch nahi hovega Pakistan nu. kuch hovega Pakistan de under. Lekin Pakistan nu kuch nahi hovega, right? As long as the under so much guy, as long as the Pakistani Taliban don't attack the Punjab, they don't care. As long and they typically don't. I mean, they made a big miscalculation in 2009 when they attacked in Bunair, and then they went and began attacking in the Punjab. Like they attacked the Punjab police. They began attacking. We used to call in those days Islamabad Islamabomb, right? Because there was so much violence that was going on. And when they came after the Punjab, that's when Punjabis decided that the military had to do something. But as long as they are killing people in the Northwest, well, now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in Fatah, and in Balochistan, this is just called collateral in support of the Pakistani victory in Afghanistan. Because, you know, Pakistanis don't care if Pashtuns die. The army that Pakistan inherited, and actually I did a formal study of this. I had Pakistan Army recruitment data at the district level historically. So yeah, the Punjab owns the army with a lot of Pashtuns. Actually, Pashtuns serve disproportionately relative to their population. And of course, Baloch and Sindhis are underrepresented. So in general, the Punjabis, with collaboration from some select elite Pashtuns, own the army, and the army owns the country.
Thank you very much, Christine. It is crystal clear the way you speak about Pakistan in details, but I suppose future will tell. But I suppose in the parameters of understanding of how you really narrated the story of Pakistan of the past, I suppose from there we have to pick on how it could pan out in the future and hope everything remains fine. And stability is there because many countries are involved now and directly interested in AFPAC region. I suppose for reasons different than wanting peace, there would be peace, at least for the moment.
All right. Hey, I look forward to meeting you one day when COVID is over, if it's ever over.
Look forward to seeing you.
Sat Sri Akal ji, Anand vich raho.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind.
Dhanyavad ji.
Thank you, ji. Thank you. Bye-bye. This is General Cardo's poetry, which we're going to talk about a little later. I've had a good conversation with Ambassador Chakravarty before we got Christine to speak about. But before I go back to his concluding remarks, I'll throw the house open just in case there are any comments on our discussion. Any questions, any ideas, or any point of view, please feel free to discuss.
The lunch has had a soporific effect.
Thank you. Yes, sir, please.
This is regarding the imposition of Urdu in East Pakistan, because it was widely resented by the Bengali, and the East Pakistan had Bengali as the language. There was a big struggle going on in Pakistan, East and West Pakistan. This is just because my boss, Mr. Late Pranam Kweti, was writing in the Mumbai. Then he was discussing this. So I thought this factor can also be there.
Indeed, it was. And I think Bengali nationalism was there. And I pointed to the fact that the leaders, both Muslims and Hindus, at one time wanted a united Bengal. No, that was the Bengali nationalism at work. That that we don't want to get divided. So religion is not a factor. These were the arguments at that time. But certainly the Muslim League was quite successful in East Pakistan. But later on, the things started changing when they started seeing the behavior of the West Pakistanis. They realized that we are going to be second-class citizens here. And in fact, in Chakravarty, when in 1956, I think, wanted to called the Awami League as the Muslim Awami League. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman objected and said, no, we will be Awami League, not Muslim Awami League. So by then itself, things which, the flavor was changing as to what happened. And then, of course, the history, 6 points, Agartala conspiracy case and all that, till you reached 71, the final sort of, hurdle of the War of Liberation. So that is how I see it. And indeed, there's no doubt about it that Bengali language, nationalism played a huge part of it. Even today, Bangladesh government has got the UN, proposed to the UN, and UN accepted the 21st of February will be International Language Day, because that's when the language nationalism, they want that to be recognized.
Thank you very much for your deep insight into how we think Pakistan would have intended to go into East Pakistan and do whatever they wanted to achieve. But ultimately,
it was ultimately a miscalculation.
So I suppose in next sessions, we will know that how India was drawn into this conflict militarily. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, sir.
And in absentia, Christine Fair, thank you very much.
And let me thank you, General Saab, for having me. It's been a great